This week saw the terrible news of hundreds of people killed in terrorist attacks across Sri Lanka. Now, in response to that, the Sri Lankan government actually banned access to a range of social media platforms, things like Facebook, Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp. The question is why, and what is the knock-on effect of that? Well, to explain, we have technology writer Ariel Bogle for the ABC. What was the reason, Ariel, that the Sri Lankan government put up for making that ban in the first place?
Well, the reason is, they say, to stop the spread of misinformation after obviously a horrific attack, whether it be misinformation about who perpetrated it. I know in the immediate aftermath there was a lot of speculation about whether ISIS was involved with this, why this attack occurred, whether the government had done enough to prevent the attack. So you can see where the line sort of emerges between when is it misinformation and when is it legitimate questioning and information that the public is desperate for. You know, there's an interesting debate going on around this blocking of social media by the Sri Lankan government that's opened up on, you know, both sides of the Pacific and the Atlantic, whether it be the tech companies and the government. But what I found interesting reflecting on Sri Lanka is this really speaks to not even the dual use of a platform like Facebook, but the endless uses.
Yeah.
So I use Twitter Messenger actually to contact a friend who I know was in Sri Lanka, he lives there at the moment, and ask him if he and his family were okay. So I'm really glad I had that immediately quick way of contacting him, checking in. And I know a lot of people, whether they be in Sri Lanka or they have relatives and friends there, used Facebook, WhatsApp, Viber, Instagram Messenger, Twitter, all those platforms to check in. So to take that away, it's a serious step. You're limiting people's ability to check in with loved ones. On the other hand, there's this misinformation question. I know that Kara Swisher, who's a prolific technology journalist from the United States, wrote a New York Times piece where she said that this felt like inevitability, that governments would seek to turn off platforms like Facebook after these kinds of terrorist attacks because of their inability to control the spread of misinformation and dodgy content. But then journalists from Sri Lanka and other people who are more knowledgeable about Sri Lanka and the region pointed out that the media in Sri Lanka has historically not always been reliable, occasionally under state control, and that journalists in Sri Lanka are often intimidated by government officials over their use of social media to spread true information, and that perhaps limiting people's ability to share even true content would exacerbate an already sort of overheated rumour mill about what happened with these attacks. So it's far more complex than anyone's op-ed will allow.
WhatsApp introduced a limit on how much their content could be auto-forwarded.
Yeah,
that was
for
found,
India, yeah.
Yeah, for India. And that, correct me if I'm wrong here, but that was a response to how WhatsApp was being used in sort of creating sort of violent protests and riots and things of that nature, yes?
That's right. I think that in many ways WhatsApp was being used like ye old chain emails.
Ye olde chain emails.
So people had pointed to WhatsApp as a factor in anti-Muslim riots, for example, that happened in India. And similarly in Sri Lanka last year, they turned off social media, or they blocked social media rather, in relation to anti-Muslim riots there too. A lot of NGOs and sort of people who look at misinformation in countries like Sri Lanka and Myanmar and all the other countries we've spoken about extensively when it comes to Facebook is the failure of these companies to put people in the region that know about the region. So a couple of Sri Lankan NGOs published this open letter last year, I believe, or maybe the year before, about Facebook's failure to properly police content in local languages. So Sinhala is one of the Sri Lankan languages, and they pointed to multiple posts that were extremely misogynistic or were racist that had been allowed to stay up, presumably because they were in a language that Facebook maybe doesn't have as many moderators in as it does in English, whereas content that had been flagged as copyright infringement was taken down in just one instant.
Right.
It doesn't matter not only that it's not in English, like I think that Australia should have its own Australian moderators who are really cognizant of our language and our political mores and our opinions on free speech. And not outsource it to countries and people that have never been here.
There's roughly 3 million people in Sri Lanka that use social media via virtual private networks. Is this actually going to end up being a bit of an own goal if the government do seek to control digital space, if that is their end game, rightly or wrongly? If they do these things more often where they put blanket bans, surely that's just going to push more people into using virtual private networks where in the long run they won't have anywhere near as much control.
Journalists like Megha Raja Gopalan, who's a journalist with BuzzFeed, she pointed out that, yes, a lot of people in Sri Lanka already are prolific users of VPNs, and really the only group that would be truly affected by this social media block would be older people or people who are less tech literate. And there's not actually a great amount of research showing that social media blocks work as a way of stopping the spread of misinformation after a terror attack or similar. And so we are sort of like groping in the dark for solutions here, both the social media companies and the government, when it comes to controlling the sort of wildfire effect that Facebook, Twitter, Instagram might be instigating. I understand the willingness of governments to use a blunt instrument like a block. And the Australian government has also been one for blunt instruments when it comes to tech policy. Actually, we don't really know it works. And so it makes this all a bit more difficult to analyse and to come up with a solution.
All right, there is lots more of this in the podcast of Download This Show. It is available right now. We're also lamenting the possible loss of one of the most iconic pieces of software of your childhood. What is it? Just have to download it and find out. See you guys.